As president, I'll defend our cherished way of life.
These are images of Donald Trump's America today.
In Joe Biden's America, you and your family will never be safe.
America has always been full of hope and resolve.
Go and vote.
Good afternoon. It's Friday, just a few days before the election. I'm Bob Costa, a national political reporter at the Washington Post. Welcome back to Post Live in our Election Daily program. Really appreciate you being here. We're trying to provide you with up-to-the-minute news, the latest headlines, everything that's going on at 1 p.m. Eastern every day on Washington Post Live, Monday through Friday. And for our program today, I will talk with two guests, Dr. Peter Navarro, the White House Director of Trade and Manufacturing Policy. We'll later be joined by Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester of Delaware, a Democrat. Congresswoman Blunt Rochester is the national co-chair of the Biden campaign, and Jenna Johnson, who I've known for years. She reported on Trump campaign activities and voters back in 2016. Now she's paying attention to Democrats in Texas and Latino voters. We'll get an update from her at the end of this program, and at least at the end of my interview with Dr. Navarro. But before we get to Dr. Navarro, just a few quick headlines to get you up to speed. The big thing to pay attention to is travel. Travel reveals a lot about politics. Why are people making decisions to go certain places? And the Midwest is the battleground. We hear a lot about the Deep South. We hear about the Sun Belt. And there's no doubt those are areas that are competitive. But if you look at today, President Trump and Democratic nominee Joe Biden, they're going to the Midwest today, Friday. Both will be in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Biden will also be in Iowa. President Trump will go to Michigan. Vice President Pence will be in Arizona, speaking of the Sun Belt. And Democratic VP nominee Senator Harris, she will go to Texas, again, the Sun Belt. So you have the nominees in the Midwest, the VPs in the Sun Belt, Arizona and Texas. The one headline that stands out to me in the Post today is in the final stretch, the Biden campaign seeking the voters who stayed home in 2016. We've talked this week about Senator Harris reaching out to those Bernie Sanders voters, that the Biden campaign needs to not just pull those moderates in the suburbs, not just stoke traditional Democrats in the cities. It needs to have the voters who's maybe sat on their hands in 2016, the Sanders voters, to come out. And you've seen the Biden campaign for months try to balance its overtures to the center with its overtures to the left. And one other headline is the president's pretty superstitious. He is going to have his final rally on election eve, Monday night in Grand Rapids, Michigan. If you are a political junkie, you remember he went to Grand Rapids in 2016. It looks like the White House will be the setting for where the president is. He won't be in New York City. He won't be at the Trump Hotel in Washington. That seems to be a fluid situation based on the president's comments to reporters this morning. But it looks like the White House, just like it was for the Republican National Convention, could be the setting for election night. Now let's bring in Dr. Peter Navarro, the president's top advisor on trade. He joined the Trump administration early on, working on trade policy. He's an antagonist of China, if I might say. Dr. Navarro, great to have you here.
Mr. Costa, how are you, sir?
Doing well.
You look marvelous in your office there.
How do you think trade plays into this campaign? I know you're a policy man, but you pay attention to trade as a political issue as well. Is this something the president is going to hit in the final few days?
Trade's one of the keys to unlocking the Midwest battleground states. If you go across, for example, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, you understand, if you're a blue-collar worker, that Joe Biden voted for NAFTA in 1994. Joe Biden voted for China into the World Trade Organization. You have institutional memory from you and your family of how we lost over 70,000 factories and over 5 million manufacturing jobs to Joe Biden's NAFTA, to Joe Biden's courtship of China. And the president has, as you know, been the toughest president ever to stand up to China. And we have the backing of the rank and file as we did in 2016. But Mr. Costa, there's other things going on over and above that.
Hey,
I've been
Peter,
doing a fairly deep. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Just you say he's been very tough on China. I spoke to Larry Kudlow, your colleague, yesterday, who did not make any kind of statement about coming tariffs on China over the pandemic. With respect, if he's so tough, why haven't further tariffs been announced on China due to the pandemic?
I'll let you and Larry have your conversations. I mean, what I know about Donald J. Trump is that we've got tariffs on over $325 billion worth of Chinese goods. We put sanctions on China for its human rights abuses in Xinjiang province. We took away all favorable treatment for Hong Kong after the Chinese Communist Party brutally crushed dissent. We've run freedom of navigation patrols relentlessly in the South China Sea. We've worked closely with Japan to solidify alliances there. So the idea that the president hasn't been tough enough on China, I think that's a non-starter, and I think the people of America know that. But let me just say this, because we are, yes, this is time, Bob, for closing arguments, and I think you want to know, boots on the ground, what we're doing and what our expectation is. And trade and manufacturing is crucial to winning the Midwest. And there's some other things going on.
What about the pandemic, Peter? You've been a fierce critic of Dr. Fauci.
You know, Bob, every time I try to talk about what we're doing and what they're thinking about, you're interrupting me to.
I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to cover some ground here.
Let me just let me cover this ground, and then you can hit me with another question, because I think for your viewers, this is what's important. We have a 6-pillar strategy for growing the economy that dates back to 2016. Deregulation, tax cuts, free trade, defense spending increases, strategic energy dominance, things like that. And so trade, of course, is crucial to winning Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. But if I go like the other things, like defense spending, Obama Biden cut defense spending by 16%, is a tremendous blow to combat readiness. What we've done is dramatically increase defense spending. If you go across the battlegrounds, I mean, I was in Wisconsin a few days ago, went to the Marinette shipyard, which is very vibrant and booming. Oshkosh builds combat vehicles. You know, that's the kind of thing that's going to really draw strong support for the president. If you go to Michigan, the Stryker plant in Sterling Heights. If you go to Pennsylvania, we literally saved the York combat vehicle plant when Obama Biden basically tried to put it into the ground. And my office really played an important role reviving the Philly shipyard. And so that's a beautiful thing. So trade, manufacturing, defense. Then you move to the strategic energy dominance. The cornerstone of that, Bob, is fracking. And if you look at Michigan and Pennsylvania, you've got 18,000 fracking wells across the Antrim Shale Formation in Michigan and the Marcellus Shale Formation in Pennsylvania. On top of that, frac sand, which is a critical element of the process, is mined in Wisconsin in the western part. Hundreds of thousands more jobs there. So my point here is that
I get your point. Energy,
all of that's going to help us win those energy, trade, defense spending, deregulation. I mean, what
about Peter?
We started
Peter,
with. You go ahead.
Peter, what about the pandemic? I want to turn to the House Democrats who are investigating you and your own efforts in terms of the pandemic and getting PPE. It's under investigation. What's your response to that ongoing investigation?
The Democrats investigate whatever. I really don't care what they do. What I can tell you, I want to finish one thing, and then I'll address the pandemic issues. Besides,
do you think you're in any legal jeopardy there?
No. Besides the strategic energy dominance, we're also seeking strategic mining dominance, and this is critical in Minnesota in particular. I was there a couple of days ago. There's a thing called the Duluth Complex, which is part of the Iron Range It has the largest resources untapped of copper and nickel and cobalt. And Obama Biden had shut that down effectively during their administration. We're opening that back up. Nickel is critical to electrification of cars. They call them lithium batteries, but the largest ingredient really is nickel. Minnesota has really high grade nickel. The cobalt is really essential to our defense industrial base because it alloys with steel and allows much higher temperatures without the degradation of the metal. So strategic mining dominance in Minnesota,
appreciate
Arizona,
those points about
and
mining.
Nevada.
Peter,
this is my closing argument, Bob.
Peter,
respectfully,
Peter,
respectfully, go ahead.
Peter,
yes, sir.
Peter, I've given you time to go through mining policy, energy policy,
indeed,
and defense policy, and trade policy. You've hit Peter. You've hit four key issues. No, I would like to bring up the pandemic, Peter. You've been at the forefront of the central issue of this campaign, going back to your memos to colleagues and President Trump earlier in 2020. What is your read right now on the pandemic? You've been studying this for over a year, and Dr. Fauci says it's getting worse. So what is the Navarro take?
What my take is that what we need to do is very carefully thread a needle between a lockdown and managing the risks of keeping the economy open. And here's the way we see it. We know two things. We know that the virus from the Chinese Communist Party, they infected us. It kills people. We also know that when you go to a lockdown, that kills people as well. It does so in different ways, whether it's depression and suicide or denial of chemotherapy or anything in between. What we've done, and this goes back to my memos you mentioned, Bob, February 9th, I started writing a series of memos which outlined on behalf of the president what has become our 4-vector attack strategy to defeat the communist China virus. It's simply this. It's the domestic onshoring of our PPE, our gloves, our goggles, our N95 respirators. We've had great success on that, standing up factories in places like Rhode Island and Arizona with the Honeywell company. Secondly, we've got testing. The initial thrust there, Bob, was to greatly expand the amount of testing we could do, but over time, more subtly, it was to steadily reduce the amount of time it took to get the results and also extend our reach to point of care, and we've at that point. The third vector, I think, is the most important. This is therapeutics. In many ways, therapeutics are as or more important than a vaccine in the short and medium run, because this is a way of drastically driving down the mortality rate if you do get sick. This is the things like 2 things that the president took, remdesivir and monoclonal antibodies, but there's also things like convalescent plasma. We've done that really well. And then finally, I remember February 9th, I wrote a memo to the task force. It said, among other things, if we started a 5-company horse race on vaccine development that week, we could have a vaccine by the end of November or early December. And we are actually tracking that. We've got a good chance of doing that. And there's people, and this is something, Bob, the doctors, I don't think really understand how the Trump administration works. The doctors are skeptical about whether we can get large quantities of this vaccine to the American people. But what we've done is turn the standard paradigm on its head. Usually you go sequentially. You go phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, you got a vaccine. Then you start your investment in production capacity, and it can take a year or 2 or more. That's not what we did. We did a simultaneous process where for all 5 of the vaccines, we put in place mass production techniques so that if that vaccine becomes viable, we're ready to deploy. So I believe dating back to January 31st, when the president pulled down the flights from China, over time, what have we done? We've implemented this 4-vector attack strategy, and we filled the strategic national stockpile and made it smarter. So
Speaking of that stockpile, what happened to all that hydroxychloroquine the administration acquired under your watch?
That's a great question, Bob. The first thing that happened was publications like the Washington Post and the New York Times and then CNN created what was unfortunately a hydroxyhysteria. The most recent study hang on,
it was the Food and Drug Administration.
No. Let me finish.
Food and Drug Administration.
Bob, do not interrupt me on this. Let me just finish this point. The latest study that has come out on this has shown unequivocally that hydroxychloroquine works in early treatment to save lives. And here's what I can tell you. We got 63 million tablets of hydroxychloroquine sitting in the strategic national stockpile. That's enough for 4 million Americans treated in early treatment, and that's enough to cut the death rate of people infected by 20 to 30,000 American lives. And to me, one of the biggest tragedies of this whole politicization of the pandemic has been the suppression of the use of a $12 drug that could have saved countless lives. So if you're asking me what about the hydroxychloroquine, it's sitting there not saving lives because the mainstream media created a hysteria about it, when the science now, Bob, the science is unequivocal. It works in early treatment to save lives, full stop.
Peter, would you acknowledge that you could say what you want, critical of the mainstream media?
And I just did.
No, wait, and that's fine. That's fine. But,
yeah.
Peter, it was the Food and Drug Administration, not a newspaper, that decided to keep it away from patients due to concerns. Is that right or wrong?
It's more subtle than that. I think what we have with the Food and Drug Administration is a response in many ways to that hydroxyhysteria. There was an interaction. They maintain that people can still use hydroxychloroquine. What happened was they just created a climate where it made it much more difficult. People became afraid to use it. Here, I'm telling you and the American people that this is a medicine that the latest scientific evidence shows that it's safe and that it can help save lives. And so we'll see. We got a couple of days of the election. We can keep having this debate, but I will guarantee you, maybe you and I can sit down in 3 or 6 or 9 months when the science is fully in, and maybe there's a randomized clinical trial, and you'll see, Bob, that we could have saved probably hundreds of thousands of Americans at the end of the day if we had simply deployed that early treatment. And look, people can disagree about it. You can say whatever you want next. But that's the way I see it, and there's plenty of evidence to support that.
Do you believe the president will keep Stephen Hahn as the FDA commissioner after the election?
All I'm focused on right now, like a laser beam, is Tuesday from a policy perspective. I really fear, Bob, looking at the possible outcome with the Biden-Harris ticket coming in, that we could have, as the president has said, a Great Depression. Now, why do I say that? Again, it gets back to what
Peter, what's your evidence for that?
I'm going to give that to you. What we do here is those points of the policy compass. We believe that tax cuts stimulate growth. Joe Biden will raise taxes. We believe that when you deregulate, that lowers the cost of our businesses, makes us more competitive, that helps us grow. Biden will increase regulations as he did in the Obama administration. If you look at the strategic energy dominance we've attained, where we're now the largest petroleum producer in the world and a net exporter, clearly over time under Biden-Harris, that's going to go away. That will basically create national security issues as well as diminish our growth. If you look at the issue of defense spending, don't underestimate this. In a lot of ways, our defense production during this pandemic has helped stabilize our economy, because the places I've gone and visited, Oshkosh or the shipyards or wherever, they're still producing, and these are great paying jobs. That Biden-Harris will cut defense spending, and that's really going to harm the states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. So that's no good. And then look, last of all, Bob,
But Peter,
trade.
can you name one?
Hey, let me just finish it. I mean, you know that Biden was responsible for voting for NAFTA. He voted for China getting into the World Trade Organization. He's been very sympathetic to China. He doesn't think they're going to, quote, eat our lunch. Will he these are questions. Will he roll back the China tariffs? Will he roll back the steel and aluminum tariffs? If he does any of that, I mean, just forget about manufacturing in this country. They lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs in their watch. As of January 2020, before the China virus hit, we had up 500,000. So elections have consequences. And I do believe, and this is kind of what I did for years before I got here, as I was a forecaster, I do believe that Joe Biden's dark winter is ahead. If
Peter,
he winds up
Peter,
in the Oval
though,
Office.
Peter, dark winter. You used the term Great Depression. Can you name one economist beyond yourself, your PhD? Can you name anyone else who's using that term Great Depression with any kind of seriousness about the Biden economic plan?
Let me turn that around. It's like when I was the president's top economic advisor in the campaign, I said that we were going to have growth way above Congressional Budget Office estimates, and I predicted the day after the election 25,000 on the Dow. I was absolutely correct. What was Paul Krugman doing? A Nobel Prize laureate. He was writing that if Trump got elected, we'd have a Great Depression. I stand by my forecasting, Bob. I predicted. I had an investment newsletter in November of 2007. I told everybody to get out of the market because the market was going to crash. I predicted the housing bubble. And back in 2006, Bob, you know what? I wrote a book called The Coming China Wars. And in that, I predicted that communist China would create a pandemic that could possibly kill millions. I wrote a book in 1984 called The Dimming of America that predicted widespread electricity shortages in 2000. And guess what? That's exactly what we had. So ignore my forecasts at your peril based on my track record. I'm telling you, we're in for hard economic times ahead if Joe Biden gets elected. He'll cut defense spending. He'll raise taxes. He'll turn off the oil wells. He'll regulate us out of business. And he'll go back to the old globalist ways of shipping our supply chains offshore. And why do I know that? What proof do I have is because that's what he did for 47 friggin' years. That's what he did. You know that. I know that. Well, he has a record.
I would
so
just
do we.
thank Dr. Navarro. I really appreciate you being here. Those are your points, and people can take them as they are. I would urge our audience, our viewers today, to also check out the Washington Post reporting on President Trump's economic agenda and plan, and on Vice President Biden's economic proposals, lowering the corporate tax rate and other things that go beyond the issues Peter mentioned, but to also read more fully about President Trump's record as well. And Peter, you're always welcome to be here to discuss your point of view. I appreciate you coming by.
Good to talk to you, Bob. You take care of yourself. Let's see what happens on Tuesday. We're all friends. We're one country.
Thanks for being here, Peter. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Bye.
Thank you. We will now be joined by my colleague, Jenna Johnson, political reporter for the Washington Post. Jenna, great to have you here.
Hey, it's so good to see you.
Jenna, you've been reporting on Texas and the Democrats for years now. I remember your stories on Beto O'Rourke in 2018 when he was running for Senate. He narrowly lost that race to Senator Ted Cruz. Now it's 2020, 2 years later. What's changed for Democrats in a place like Texas?
Yeah, I've been fascinated by Texas for quite a while now. And the big thing that's been happening for years there is there's a demographics change happening. There are a lot of people who are moving to Texas. By one estimate, every day, 1,000 people move to Texas from places like California, New York, Florida, Illinois. A lot of them are Democrats. They just bring their political beliefs with them. At the same time, it's a young state. You have a lot of people who are turning 18 and qualifying to vote, including a lot of Latinos. Young Latinos, maybe their parents didn't have the right to vote, but they do, and they can be a force. So for a long time, Democrats thought, maybe in 2024 we could win statewide in Texas. That's been kind of the year that they were looking at. Beto O'Rourke sped that up. And not just Beto O'Rourke, President Trump sped that up. In addition to these demographic changes, you also have you have a number of Republicans or some right-leaning independents who are willing to vote for a Democrat right now, who are fed up with the president and are willing to do something a little different.
Jenna, what about Latino voters in Texas and elsewhere? When you think about President Trump's closing argument at the final debate against Vice President Biden, he talked about the Obama-Biden record on immigration, trying to almost share the burden of immigration policy with Vice President Biden. Is Vice President Biden breaking through with Latino voters in the way he needs to win the election?
Well, listen, for months, Latino activists, Latino lawmakers, Latino organizers have been yelling at the Biden campaign saying, you need to do more to reach out to Latino voters. They were on track to be the second largest voting group after white voters this election. And the Biden campaign has done some reach out, but a lot of it's happened just in these final months, final weeks of the campaign. Meanwhile, you have the Trump campaign that has really heavily focused on Latino voters for months now, for years. And it's not that Trump thinks that he's going to win the Latino vote. A majority of Latinos are still siding with Biden and with Democrats. But in states that are decided by really small margins, like in Florida, in Pennsylvania, if President Trump can pick up a few more Latino voters there, that can be the deciding thing. And again, one of the big things with Biden and the Latino community is immigration. Now, immigration isn't the only issue that Latinos care about. It isn't necessarily the top issue that Latinos care about. But this was a really big problem for the Obama administration. There were a lot of people who were deported during that time. And while the Obama administration did create DACA and do some other things, there are some lasting bad feelings about what happened and a lot of questions about if Biden has actually addressed that or not.
Jenna, finally, to go back to 2016 and your chronicles of Trump voters across the country, you've kept tabs on them for nearly 4 years, over 4 years now, going back to the campaign of 2016. In a collective sense, where is that Trump voter that you met who maybe was at a diner or in a rural area or working class town? Where are they today, just as we head into this final weekend? What have you learned over the past week or two, but also over the past couple of years?
That's a really great question. A majority of those Trump supporters are still with the president. There is something about supporting this president that is bigger than politics. It's cultural in a way. I've talked with a lot of Trump supporters over the years who said, they voted for him kind of on a whim in 2016, but they're really excited to vote for him in 2020. They really believe that he has gotten a lot done. They really believe in him. And sometimes those conversations can be a little uncomfortable because as a reporter, you're asking for specific examples of how their lives have gotten better. For Trump supporters who are living in rural areas, there's not necessarily a lot of evidence there. There have been a tariff war, pandemics coming through, but they love him and they really believe in him.
Jenna Johnson, congratulations on another terrific cycle of reporting. Thanks for stopping by to sharing your insights. It's appreciated.
Thank you, Bob.
We are now joined by the national co-chair of the Biden campaign, Delaware Representative Lisa Blunt Rochester. Representative Blunt Rochester, great to have you here on Washington Post Live. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. It's great to be here. I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
So I grew up not far from Delaware in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is just across the state line.
Correct.
In that area, in Delaware, in Pennsylvania, what are you seeing as the Biden campaign's chances of winning that state?
Well, I think we have a good chance of Delaware. I think he's got a good chance of winning Delaware. Pennsylvania actually is the state where he was born as well as I was born. And I actually had an opportunity to actually visit uh, Philadelphia twice this past week. And the excitement and the enthusiasm is there. I went to one of the polling places, one of the early vote places, locations, and there was a line that literally stretched around the block, 3 sides of the city block of voters that were ready to vote, enthusiastic about voting, and even brought lawn chairs, because they took Michelle Obama's advice and said, you know what, I'm wearing my comfortable shoes, I'm packing a chair and a lunch, and I'm here to vote and to do my civic duty and to vote in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So I think Pennsylvania is going to be a stellar win for us. But we're working as hard as we can. I mean, as to the very last minute, we're going to be working to make sure that every vote is cast and every vote is counted.
I wanted to start with Pennsylvania because you're right. It would be quite surprising if Vice President Biden and Senator Harris did not win Delaware. But you brought up Philadelphia,
Yeah.
Representative, and the death of a black man in a police shooting. How does that affect the presidential campaign in Philly, in Pennsylvania, in the final few days here?
Yeah. Well, I had an opportunity on behalf of the vice president to sit at a roundtable conversation with some community members, and it had been the morning after the tragic passing of Walter Wallace. And I think, first of all, it just points to the fact that we still have so much work to do as it pertains to the issues of policing, the issues of race, accountability and transparency. And really it also points to the fact that what Joe Biden has said from the very beginning is we support peaceful protest. And people are marching because they want to see action. And I love the line that Kamala Harris always says that, bad police are bad for good police. Bad cops are bad for good cops. And so the idea of being able to, on day one in this administration, look at the issues of justice and policing, just like Kamala has put forward a bill in the Senate, which we passed in the House, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Look at a commission that would actually delve deeply into these issues and address them. Unfortunately, we have a president right now that, doesn't really want to deal with these issues. And what it does is it exacerbates and further adds fuel to the fire and does not cause the healing that we need. And so we need both healing and we need action. And we're unfortunately not getting it from this administration.
If Vice President Biden wins the White House, what's the first legislative priority he should pursue in terms of that healing and that action you speak of?
Well, as I just mentioned, he is calling for on day one to be able to focus on a commission that brings folks together to talk about how we address this systemically. How do we deal with these systemic issues of race? How do we deal with these systemic issues of justice? What I really appreciate, I've known Joe Biden for over 30 years as my senator, as our vice president, and now me as his congressperson. And he is a person who doesn't just talk about things. He wants to understand. He wants to constantly have things get better and improve. And so this being a priority is key. But as everyone else knows, the number one priority for this administration also is going to be getting this pandemic under control. And I think in the conversation that you had with Mr. Navarro, it points to the challenge that we have, the contrast between these two candidates. One wants to pretend that it doesn't exist, and the other is saying we have to address it head on. The pandemic is so much connected to our economy, it's connected to jobs, it's connected to our physical and mental health, and it's connected to all of the trauma that we are all facing. And so he
Let's
would be dealing on multiple tracks on day one.
let's stick with the pandemic because
Yeah.
President Trump, in the closing days here, is casting Vice President Biden as the nominee who will push for a shutdown of the country, another, quote, lockdown of the country. What's your response to the president's pitch, his final appeal as the national co-chair of the Biden campaign?
Well, the first thing I would say is even if you just look at how he's campaigning, the difference, the dichotomy. One is campaigning in a way that is still getting out there to the people in safe ways and in effective ways, but responsibly. The other is creating super spreader events, not encouraging people to wear masks, not following the science. And I think, clearly the first thing we have to do is follow the science and listen to what the experts tell us. The President Trump is actually denigrating the scientists. It's important that we follow the science. The sooner that we can get the pandemic under control, the sooner that we can have a bright, vibrant economy. And so it's really important. They're tied to each other. The health and well-being of our citizens is tied to the health and well-being of our economy. And so in a Biden administration, you would see a focus on getting the pandemic under control, everything from contact tracing, testing, treatment, and making sure that we have a vaccine that people can be confident in, to dealing with the Defense Production Act and finding ways that we can actually have states not competing against each other, but having a national comprehensive strategy. That's what's lacking with the Trump administration. It's everything is piecemeal, and we need leadership. We need leadership from the top.
Take me inside the Biden campaign, that Delaware inner circle. Right? You're part of that political world in a deep way. The final few weeks of this campaign have been very rough, to say the least. President Trump has gone after Vice President Biden's mental acuity. He's gone after Vice President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and the family's business relationships in the past. What has that been like? And do you believe Vice President Biden has said enough to defend himself?
Yeah, the incredible thing about Joe Biden and this entire campaign, I've been there since day one. And I can tell you, I started off with a conversation with him before he decided to actually, formally announce. And in that conversation, the things that he talked about, first of all, it was at the advent, it was right after Charlottesville happened. And so I think shaken to the core, it caused him to say, I will step up. I want to step up and be a part of uniting this country. But then as we went into the pandemic, it really became clear that, and he said it on that first debate stage, which I was actually in the audience. And I'll never forget, he just looked at the camera and said, it's not about Trump's family. It's not about my family. It's about your family. And that's kind of been the anchor of everything that we do. How does this keep us safer as a country? Internationally, are we safer? Locally, are we safer? How can we be healthier as a nation, our economy and our physical and mental health? And then lastly, how can we be united? That's the focus. We don't pay attention to the name calling. We don't pay attention to the sleight of hand and, hey, look over here while we do this to you over there. We're laser focused on making sure that we, number one, win on Tuesday and that it be decisive. And that's my call to everyone. Please, please, please make sure that you and your family members and everybody you know are voting. And so that is number one. We must win. And secondly, it's really important that we govern. And I think that's what's been lacking. It's one thing for, the president to run for office, but you don't just run. And you don't just run to that base of people that we were talking about earlier in your interview. It is
Right.
You become the president of the United States. And so that's the focus. It has been, you can talk about us, you can throw darts at us. This is about the people.
On that point of governing, Representative, do you approve or disapprove of the way Speaker Pelosi has handled the stimulus negotiations?
Let me tell you, I get to be on all of our caucus calls. I get to hear the just amount of work and energy and effort and the negotiating skills but also her willingness to say, all right, we started here. Now, remember, we started with this HEROES Act, maybe, has it been 5 months now? It's been over 100 days that we put forward a bold plan to be able to deal with the issues that are hurting the American people. We put that out there. We put out what needed to be done. And even Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, said the risk of doing too much, of doing too little is greater than the risk of not doing enough. So that's number one. We're in an unprecedented time. Everybody's heard that word 1,000 times, but it is true. And so the response needs to be big and bold. And I feel that the speaker has done a good job of advocating for the principles that we know that Americans need. We see Americans now on food lines. She's been fighting for food. It doesn't make sense. We see Americans wondering, how are they going to be able to pay their rent? We put that in our legislation. The state and local governments, the fact that teachers, firefighters, paramedics, it is a need, and we need to be bold. And so I am proud of our caucus and the work that we're doing. I really, unfortunately, the administration has even flip-flopped on whether they want it to be a big package or a small package or no package. We need to get something done. And I feel our caucus has done an incredible job fighting and advocating for the people.
Your colleague in Congress, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, has been a Biden supporter like you for a long time. There's a lot of talk in Washington, based on my own reporting, that Senator Coons could end up in the Biden administration if Vice President Biden wins the White House in a cabinet slot or some kind of high-ranking post. That means he would have to leave the Senate. If he ever left the Senate in the coming year or so, would you run for his open seat?
So Bob, are you trying to do some breaking news story here or something like that? I will tell you.
Just looking for an answer, Representative.
Okay, so first of all, Chris Coons is an incredible legislator as well as leader. Secondly, and my middle name is Blunt, so I don't have a problem being blunt about my intentions and what I'm focused on. I really am focused on Joe Biden getting elected. I'm hopeful that I will be reelected by Delaware on Tuesday as well. And I worked really hard to get on the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House and on 4 of those subcommittees. I'm on the Health Subcommittee. I'm on Energy and Climate Change. I'm also on Consumer Protection and Commerce. And I believe that in a Biden administration, in my role in the Congress, and also as a whip, I'm actually a part of the whip operation with Jim Clyburn, that I could be very helpful on moving things like dealing with the pandemic and dealing with climate change, which are 2 of the biggest issues that we hear about. I'm also a person of faith. And as a person of faith, I'm always, I listen to go where you're called. Right now, the thing I hear is bloom where you're planted. So my focus, my goal as national co-chair is to get Joe Biden elected, and hypotheticals are down the road. But right now, my focus is to win, Joe to win, for me to
be
win.
Blunt, though, it seemed to be blunt, to steal your phrase and name.
You go right ahead.
It seems like, based on your answer, you'd lean more toward staying in the House than mounting a Senate campaign.
To be blunt, what I'm saying is you go where you're called. You go where you're needed.
You go where you're called.
This is where I'm needed. This is where I'm needed. And so I'm running for Congress. I'm hoping I'll win. And, let's deal with hypotheticals when they become realities. Right now, we need people to vote for Joe Biden. We need to win the White House and Kamala Harris. That's my blunt. That's my focus. That's all I care about. I appreciate anybody out there who's praying for me, but otherwise, I'm focused on making sure Joe Biden wins.
I will just note as a reporter to our audience, the representative did not rule anything out, but we'll leave it there, Representative.
Bob, yeah, I'll have to come back on your show. You'll have me back if something.
You better break the news on this program, okay? Washington Post Live. We get great ratings in Delaware. Wilmington loves us.
That's okay. Well, that's where I am, Wilmington, and we do love you. We do love you, Bob. Thanks, and everybody. IWillVote.com. IWillVote.com. Make sure you have a plan. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Representative. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you all for joining us again for Election Daily, our program running through the election and after the election for a few days to have these fascinating discussions with people like Representative Blunt Rochester, with Dr. Navarro. That was a conversation that was lively. We love lively here. And Jenna Johnson, my colleague, to offer her insights on the campaign. Really great conversations this afternoon on Friday afternoon. On Monday, I will interview Democratic House member Pramila Jayapal from Washington State. She's been here before. She'll be back. Senator Todd Young, running the Senate campaign for the Republicans in the Senate of Indiana. He'll be here. So Todd Young, Pramila Jayapal, that's Monday, the eve of the election, as President Trump heads to Grand Rapids and Vice President Biden goes around the South and the Midwest. So much to cover in the final few days. Appreciate you stopping by here this afternoon. We will see you next week.